Well, hello, DCO Nation, and welcome back to another DCO Live. Guys, I appreciate y'all jumping on. Again, a ton of you guys on tonight. I really appreciate you guys joining us. Remember, guys, this is your show. So if you have questions, throw them up into the chat box, and I will kick them off to Captain Matt Parrish. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm not going to do the introduction. Why don't you introduce yourself and let everybody know what you do and who you are?
Yes, sir, Chris. Thanks for having me, man. I'm glad to be on the Dead Calm Outdoor Show, and I'm a captain in the Galveston Bay complex down here near Houston, Texas, and I chase redfish in shallow water. The shallower, the better. Run a Sabine technical poling skiff, and my main focus is redfish. We chase them year round, and I've been guiding now for about I've been fishing my whole life. Been guiding for 2 or 3 years now, and I guide part time. I own a small business as the day job, but I get out twice a week on Thursday and Friday and push clients around in the marsh and love it. You know, that's my main passion, and so. Got a family, wife, and 4 kids, and two of them just graduated high school.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Nice.
the other two are quite a bit behind. That my youngest are 10 and 7, but the oldest are twins, and they just graduated high school and about to see if their wings work. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So, guys, I guess the way that I kind of came in touch to Captain Matt was I listened to his podcast, the Empty Stringers podcast on Spotify. And I tell you what, I am not trying to brown nose or anything, but I truly believe if you guys chase redfish, you need to listen to his podcast. It is absolutely fantastic. I think it's probably the best podcast out there. I listened to the Bite Me podcast, which is awesome. But as far as just redfish information, Captain Matt really dives into redfish. He loves the redfish and the shallow water fishing for these, and it's the information is absolutely fantastic. But there was one episode that really stuck in my mind, and this is the whole reason why I wanted to have Captain Matt on, is he broke down how birds act around schooling fish. And I have never heard anything like that before. And I think I reached out to you, Captain Matt, maybe about a month or so ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very gracious to willing to come on to really break it down. So I am done talking. Captain Matt, why don't you go ahead and jump into it and let's talk about, how birds locate redfish.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the kind words. One of the things that when I started getting really serious about redfish, uh, the best advice I got was go as shallow as you can get, and then pay attention to your surroundings. And I started really dialing in on, okay, what is going on around me in these back lakes? What separates some marshy areas from others? Whether it be the bottom, whether it be the color of the water, the tide flow, the type of structure that's growing back there. But the number one thing that I have come across that changes the game, that makes you catch more fish, makes the fish easier to locate, is hands down the birds. And although they do different things at different times of the year for us down here in Galveston than they probably do for you guys, I think there's a lot of crossover. And like you said, I mean, you've got listeners all over the U.S. and the globe. I think to break it down uh, by bird, and I'll reference it to what they do in my area, but I've also seen them do it in other areas. So the king of the marsh when it comes to redfish, and what bird correlates with them the best is the snowy egret. The snowy egret is a redfish magnet. They have a very symbiotic relationship with redfish. The redfish don't seem to be spooked by them, and they don't seem to be spooked by the redfish. They use each other to feed, and it's all about shrimp. Where I'm at, it's all about shrimp, and so typically, what you'll find in the Galveston area in the fall, usually starting around mid-September, and it'll last all the way through about, say, early to mid-December, you'll see snowy egrets that are typically like loner birds. They don't like to be in groups. They don't travel in groups.
Is that
Uh,
is that what you're talking about?
No, so I would call that a great egret.
Okay.
A snowy egret is smaller, has a shorter neck, it has a black beak, and it has yellow feet. The yellow feet is the dead giveaway.
Okay.
So white bird, black beak, yellow feet. That's your snowy egret. We are going to talk about that great egret though, because that great egret can come in clutch in certain moments. But your snowy egret, uh, you know, let's say for us, the magic happens in the fall, but there are plenty of times a year, really all throughout the year. If you see a snowy egret on the bank with its feet in the water or right up there next to the water, and it's actively looking down, hunting for shrimp, there is a high probability that there is a redfish in front of that snowy egret. You have to be careful the way that you approach that fish, because the bird will spook off the closer you get, and then that can potentially spook the fish. So you have to throw past the bird, and you have to reach out a pretty good ways, and throw before you spook that bird off, and drag through where that bird is looking, and you usually can land a redfish that way. But
Mm.
in the fall, what we get in Texas is like, we'll see, I'll be going through the marsh, and I look over and I see a shoreline, and there are four snowy egrets lined up on the bank. They're probably 10 to 15 feet apart. I shut down and I begin to pole in that direction, and I start watching them. And those egrets don't line up like that unless there's some kind of magic going on, or maybe the magic was just going on and it finished, but it may start back up again, because you have redfish schools that will come down the bank and they'll push shrimp out in front of them, especially on an outgoing tide. The shrimp is being sucked out of the marsh grass, that salt grass that you get along the shoreline, and those egrets will play hopscotch. They'll hop over each other, and there's always a bird on the lead fish of the school. And so you can tell where the school is and how fast they're traveling by watching the egrets hop. And the closer you get and the shallower the water is, then you can finally see the fish. But I can spot a school of redfish from 200-300 yards away by seeing the birds on the shoreline. So they are by far the most important bird to my fishery. There's still a Texas place, but like if you move up the coast, or sorry, for me, it's down the coast to Port O'Connor, different landscape. They've got a bunch of dead mangroves from the freeze that happened in like 21, I think. And so what the egrets do there, the water on a high tide will wash up and get underneath those dead mangroves, and the egrets will sit in the limbs of the dead mangroves, and they'll look down and see the fish coming, and they'll hop from mangrove to mangrove to do just like they're doing on the shore, only it's in a group of dead mangroves, and they'll
Okay.
hop along, and you can find schools of redfish that way. So like the egret, anytime I see an egret, I'm paying attention to what it's doing. If it's 2 or 3 feet back in the grass or back on the shore, and they do this thing where they tuck their head down. Show's over, they're taking a break, there's nothing going on. But if you see an egret up on the edge of the water and they're actively eating shrimp, especially if there's more than one egret and they're moving down the shoreline, they're trying to tell you there's redfish here. There's a school of redfish. And so
Okay. So just to make sure that I understand. So the redfish are pushing the shrimp, and then the egrets are feeding off the shrimp that the redfish are pushing and staying right there. So they're basically, for lack of a better term, they're feeding each other as they're going. Okay.
yep, they will. And it gets I don't want to say complicated, but it gets complex to where there people think, like I've got some crystal ball, but I'm really just looking. I've just seen it happen so many times. So one of the things that we'll see sometimes is, you have the egrets, they're lined up, they're 10 to 15 feet apart, and then they start bunching up together, and then they start hopping over each other, and they're following that lead fish like I was talking about. Well, then you'll see a couple of snowy egrets look like they got disinterested, and they'll just stop and they'll hang back. And I'll tell my client, we're not going to chase that school any further down the shoreline. They're going to turn around and come back to us. And say, how do you know that? Those two snowy egrets that just fell off of the group and they're just hanging, they know that school is going to come back down that same shoreline. And so they will sit there and wait. The school gets to the end of where usually it's in an area where the salt grass on the shore kind of dead ends. They'll turn around, they'll come running right back towards us, and we'll be sitting there waiting on them. And the way we know that is based solely off of bird activity.
Yeah.
And then eventually, the birds fly off, and you're left with just the redfish. But the egrets, I carry a pair of binoculars on the boat just so I can look for birds, whatever bird is making the magic happen during whatever season I'm in. Because if I'm having a tough
I've
day, I
never
crawl up on
thought
the
about
platform and
that.
just look. What's that?
I've never thought about that. Having some binoculars with me just to look. I've never even thought about that.
Yeah, I keep them on all the time because if I'm having a tough day and I know if I've been on schooling fish and I know that we should be finding schools of redfish, but I'm not, and I'm beating my head against the wall, I stand up on the platform, my polling platform, and get my binoculars out, and I look and I go, oh, they're 2 lakes over. They've moved. We'll pick up and go over to the next lake. And that's true for snowy egrets, but it's also true for seagulls. I mean, your regular seagull will get on schools of redfish or trout, and depending on how they're flying, you can tell what type of fish is below them. So the trout, which I'm not a trout guy, I'm not going to say I won't stop and snag a trout out of a school if I'm having a slow morning. I mean, it's there for the taking. But typically with clients, if I have a fly fishing client on the boat and they're diehard redfish, I will not stop at a group of schooling trout. And I all the time will have a client go, how do you know that that's trout and not redfish? And I'll say, okay, this is the way you know. Trout, when they school, they're very erratic. They move as one big unit, but they're constantly intermingling and blowing up bait up to the surface. And so a bait ball that's being pushed by trout will shower out in one spot, and then it will shower out in a totally different spot. And because of that, the seagulls fly higher in the air, and they're not in a very tight pattern. They're kind of up, hovering around, looking down, and then boom, they'll dart down, and then another one will dart down 10 feet away to the left, right? That's trout. Sometimes it can be gaff top, but that's typically way out in the middle of an open bay. That's a 6-7 foot deep bay. You might get some gaff top on that. But typically back in the shallower waters, when you see that sporadic behavior, those seagulls flying high, there's typically more seagulls in the group on a school of trout because there's more trout in the school.
Hmm.
And so if I've got 15 seagulls and they're hovering high and they're darting in different directions, but they're still kind of moving in one general direction, that's trout. If they're on redfish, they will fly low to the water and they will stay in a tight pattern. So there's none of this like hovering way up high and wondering where the bait's gonna shower out. Those redfish are like vacuum cleaners on the mud bottom of the marsh, and they're pushing through, and the shrimp will anchor up in the mud. They kind of like anchor up in there. When the redfish come by, the shrimp jump out and flower out in front of them. That's what the seagulls are feeding off of. And so they have to stay right down close to if here's the water, those redfish are going to be 2 to 3 feet off of the water, and they're going to be staying there. On high wind days, sometimes you'll get a circle. So they'll stay down on the fish, and then they'll fly in a big circle, and they'll come back and get back down on the fish. That means that the school of fish is moving across the wind rather than directly into the wind. Because if the seagull has to face the wind to stay in a hover, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So if the seagull is hovering for a minute and then picking up, making a big circle and coming back and hovering, you can start to track that school's trajectory based off that bird's behavior. So you go, all right, I know it's redfish because the seagulls are flying low. There's fewer seagulls. There may be some terns mixed in. That happens pretty often. And they'll stay tight to the school, tight to the water. They fly in a tight formation, 2 to 3 feet off the water. You might start to get that circling action if they're moving across the wind, but that's pretty much how you know, and you can see that from a long way off. So I'll
Hmm.
look in the binoculars and I'll go, hey, we got a school of trout 300 yards off to our left, but we've got a school of redfish, you know 200 yards to our right, and we'll go zero in on those
Yeah.
redfish.
Yeah.
um,
Man, I tell you what, that is the information you just spewed out in the last 10 minutes is incredible. I mean, I'm glad I'm recording this because I'm going to go back and listen to guys. I know you guys have questions. Throw them into the chat box. Get them out here to Captain Matt so that he can help you guys out. But talk about the great white egret, because I know we've got
okay.
a ton of those here.
Yeah, so the great white egret is what I use typically for that solo fish, or that the ones and twos. Most you might see is maybe 2 or 3 fish, and the thing that triggers you to knowing that you've got a fish there is those great egrets will stand by themselves on a point. Typically they love points, but they'll also stand on a regular shoreline. And if their neck's extended and they're looking down at the water and they're paying close attention to what's going on, just sit there and watch them for a minute. You will see a swirl. You might even see a tail if it's shallow enough. But great egrets are great about singling in on that one solo fish. It's usually a bigger fish in our area. Typically, if I go chase down an egret, like a great white egret, and it's sitting there by himself and he's been feeding, it's a telltale sign too if that bird has been sitting there for a long time. So what I like to do
Hmm.
is, if I see one of those great egrets sitting on a point, I won't go straight to that bird. I will fish the marshy area leading up to that bird, and every 30 seconds to a minute, I'm glancing over and I'm watching that bird. Has it moved? Is there any water surface activity and out in front of that bird? And more times than not, you'll see something happen. But the reason you don't want to rush right over to it is, if there's a single in front of that bird, or even a double, you probably have other redfish milling about in that area, because when the redfish aren't schooling, they're typically holding to an area, they're holding to cover, and they go to areas that hold bait. They're still potentially could be in feeding mode. They just don't want to group up like they will. For us, typically it's early morning or late afternoon that they'll school in these big, 20, 30, 50 fish schools. When they're not doing that, they meander around an area and they're very territorial while you have a good crop of shrimp. And so that great egret will be sitting there, and I'll fish a shoreline. I'll fish 100 yards of a shoreline leading up to that fish, sometimes 200 yards of a shoreline, watching him the whole time and hoping that I pick a fish or two up before I get to him, because I know he's got a fish. And as long as he's there, I know he's going to be on that fish. And so that is a great fly angler trick. If I'm in muddy water, which we have a ton of muddy water in Galveston, I know that I've got a better chance catching a redfish on the fly in front of a great egret that's accurate, that's active. You sometimes they're sitting there and their behavior is more like, you know, they're like people, right? Like they're like, if we're sitting on the couch, like our posture's different. If we're up working, doing something important, like they look alert, they're looking at the water. If you see them reach down and snag a shrimp off of the water, you're like, okay, that's all I needed to see. Something is congregating those shrimp up there. The shrimp don't just hop out of the water so that the bird can get them, right? Like that shrimp is anchored into the mud. So the birds need the fish to scare the shrimp up out of the water, and that's when they get them. And so
Okay.
keeping your eye on that bird for the 200-300 yards that you're approaching it, and then knowing like when you get there, if you make the cast right, you're gonna get that fish.
So the white egret, when I'm seeing him hopping down the shoreline, maybe going 10 yards at a time or whatnot, is he staying with a fish or a couple of fish, or is he just moving to stay with the bait or the shrimp he's feeding on?
So it depends. It's probably going to depend on the time of year, and because our ecosystems function a little differently on bait hatches, I would say that when you're in a mullet hatch, sometimes you will see that bird uh, scour a whole shoreline, and it's not because of fish. It's because these rafts of mullet are moving down the shoreline.
Okay.
So you could get a raft of mullet that's got 100 finger mullet in it, and that bird is following that raft of mullet. If you see that, you should see those mullet causing kind of a showering out, or like some disturbance. If it's a fish or a school of fish and they're on shrimp, then a great egret would totally do that. They don't do it very often in my neck of the woods. They're more stationary, like sit and stalk kind of
Okay.
feeders. But I have seen them chase a fish down a shoreline before. Yeah, it
Okay.
happens. It's
Okay.
usually not a school. It's usually like your ones and twos.
Ones and twos. Okay. I do have several comments that or questions that just came in. I'm going to kind of lump them all together for you.
Okay.
Um, Heath was asking about the blue herons.
Hmm.
What kind of patterns do they have? Yak and Inshore wanted to know about pelicans. And then David do these bird observations work all season long, all year long? So I'm going to kind
Yeah.
of lump all of those together for you. So
Okay. Yeah. So let's start with the great blue heron. I have not personally had any luck correlating the blue heron's behavior to, like, I'm going to go catch a fish right now. But what I do correlate it to is that bird is eating what all the other birds are eating, and also what the fish are eating. And so if you have a blue heron that's decided to hang out in an area and it's not nesting, then you can bet that there's the right ingredients around. Now, am I going to stop and fish an area that has one blue heron? Probably not. But if it's got a blue heron and a great egret and some ibises on the shoreline and there's a few seagulls sitting on a post, I'm fishing that area. You know what I
Okay.
mean? That's
Yeah.
I'll tell you, as far as the pelicans go, that is one bird that I typically will not follow around because they dive and smash into the water and ruin everything. I've also watched a pelican eat a redfish whole before. And so I know that redfish can get spooked by the pelicans pretty good. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that there aren't redfish in the area. There probably are. It might be one of the reasons why the pelican is there. But typically, your pelicans aren't eating redfish, but they are making a ruckus. And it could be that there's bait present there for sure that they're feeding on. But I will typically stay away from shallow water that has a bunch of pelicans in it because it's just one other thing working against me. I've got a big fat bird out there that is about to scare all of my
Yeah.
fish, and I'm
Yeah.
going to do a good enough job scaring them on my own. I don't need any help, so I don't mess with the pelicans. As far as the bird activity in the seasons, I'm going to tell you I'm going to tell you the way the cycle works for us, and I think it will help anyone wherever they are correlate it to their location because it's not so much the time of year. It's when and what bait is hatching. Okay? So we have brown shrimp that hatch in the spring. Brown shrimp, for whatever reason, I'm not an expert. I wish I was. There's not a lot of information about the true like intricacies of the life cycle of some of our bait that hatches, but um, the brown shrimp, for whatever reason, don't get buried up into the salt grass as often as the white shrimp do. The brown shrimp tend to like to anchor, they like softer bottoms, and they like to anchor into the mud or seagrass. So in the spring, round about middle of March, we have a hatch. That hatch is predominantly brown shrimp. They get big enough around April 1st for us to where the redfish start to school. Those redfish will gather in big numbers in the middle of the shallow water back lakes, in the middle of the open ponds and lakes, not along the edges. And the seagulls and the terns will hover over those schools, and the seagulls are where it's at in the spring for us. And it's because the snowy egrets can't access these balls of bait because the redfish are messing with them out in the middle, right? So the egrets are sitting on the shore wishing they could play in this game, but they can't because it's all going on out in the middle, right? So
Right.
seagulls number one in the spring, and then your crabs, your baby crabs for us will start to hatch out in April and May. That's where you can start to get more shoreline action because those crabs will do everything. They'll be out in the middle or they'll be floating around up next to a grassy shoreline. Great egrets are great for finding small crab hatches. They love small crabs. So whenever those blue crabs hatch for you in your area, wherever you are, great egrets play a big role in that. You start looking for them a lot more. Ibises can also play a role in that because an ibis, you don't see an ibis feeding out in the water as often. You more see them feeding in flooded areas, like flooded grassy areas and stuff. That's indicative that there's bait that's washed up in there on the high tide. So if bait washed up in there on the high tide, even if you're fishing it on a low tide, you know the magic was happening. You know that the bait is there, right? So you want to stop and fish those areas. As we move into summertime, the seagulls slow down on their schooling a little bit because it's time for the seagulls to nest. They're nesting and they're doing their thing. They still will have big groups of seagulls over trout, but you'll start to see groups of redfish that don't have any birds on the top of them for us. Uh, and then your brown shrimp hatch starts to die out. If we're lucky and we have a good year, it lasts us all the way through the summer, but that doesn't happen every summer. That tends to tail off. And then at the beginning of the fall, the white shrimp hatch. When the white shrimp hatch, they like to bury themselves up into the salt grass and up along the shorelines. And so the redfish start to scour the shorelines and start to school up and push down those shorelines. And when it first starts, there's a little bird called the least tern. It looks like a pocket-sized version of a regular tern, which we call a lyrebird or a royal tern or whatever.
Okay.
It's a lot smaller than your regular tern, and it will hover about 15 feet above a school of redfish on the shoreline, and it will squawk and raise all kind of hell. I mean, just making all kind of noise. Red-winged blackbirds typically jump in the mix. They're fluttering on the shoreline and going crazy and making all kind of noise. That's a school of redfish. And that's one of the least noticed birds. The least tern working with that red-winged blackbird is a cool sight to see. It's something you don't see very often. We only see it at the very beginning of fall, and then the least tern leaves, and I don't know where it goes. It may go up to South Carolina where you guys are. I have no idea where it goes. But it's gone after that, and then once we get into a really solid schooling pattern in the fall, you get the snowy egrets that are back in action. And so your actual, like, I know there's a fish on this deal right here is like, obviously your seagulls, depending on how they're flying. Your snowy egrets are first place in that. Your terns. I want to talk about terns because we call them lyrebirds, right? So I don't know. Do y'all call them lyrebirds up where you're at?
I'm not exactly sure I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so in Texas, there is this uh, idea around a tern. It's spelled Tern. It's a little small bird that looks like a small seagull, but
Is
it's
this, I have a picture of a tern. Is that it?
yep, that's it. That's it.
Okay.
Yep, that is exactly the kind of tern that we have. So
Okay.
you can get a big group of terns flocking over something in the water, and you get over there and it's not a school of fish. That's why they've gotten the name lyrebird around our neck of the woods. Like, we call them lyrebirds because you get over there and they've lied to you. There is no school of fish. And so, however, they are feeding on bait. And if you learn the behavior of the tern, it can lead you to more fish. So the seagull is the bully of the marsh. And what happens time and time again in our marshes in Texas is a tern spots a school of redfish. It hovers 10 to 15 feet above them. And a tern does this thing where it looks down and then it looks around like, are y'all seeing this? And then it looks down again. It will not smash its face on the water. If you see a tern dive and smash his face on the water, that's not a school of redfish. If they're just hovering, and they might be looking at a school of redfish, and if you watch it for another minute, a a seagull or a group of seagulls will come take it over from him. Because just like I'm watching the seagulls are watching the terns. the terns are discovering these schools of redfish, and the seagulls will come and take it over and not let them have any. You'll see them chase them away from the school. And so a seagull will also, when the water gets cold down here, it will follow a pelican around, and instead of landing in the water because the water's so cold, it'll land on the pelican's back and eat whatever the pelican's trying to eat. So that's why I call them the bully of the marsh. But the terns can alert you to fish. You just have to, if they're doing the whole smash their face into the water, then it's not a school of redfish. You want them to stop, hover, and look. And then when you see them do that and they're paying extra close attention to this particular spot, you can get over there and beat the crowd to get to some of these schools. So, but I will look far off. If I'm like, let's say I'm 200 yards off, and I'm looking at a flock of birds, and I want to try to tell the difference between, okay, is this a group of 20 terns or is it a group of 20 seagulls? The way you tell the difference is a tern flutters its wings at a lot faster pace than a seagull does. A seagull, its wings are dark on the outside, darker than you realize. And so from far away, you need to see the black on the wings, and they need to be moving slower than a tern's wings. And it takes time on the water and practice to see that. But a lot of times on a school of redfish, you see them together. So you see a tern mixed in with a seagull, and you can really start to learn the difference between the speed of the wings and the coloration in the wings, and you'll get better at telling them apart when you're, a couple hundred yards off. It could save you the trip. Sometimes you get when you first start doing this, you wander over there and you go, oh, that wasn't anything,
Yeah.
But the longer you do it, the better you get at telling apart. You'll know whether you need to paddle over there or not,
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that's absolutely fantastic. Guys, I don't know where the time went. It's been 38 minutes. I usually try to keep it at 30 minutes, but I mean, it's absolutely, it feels like 5 minutes sitting here talking. So I tell you what, I want to respect Captain Matt's time. I know he is, it's still early where you are, but Central Time, it's probably like 7:30. So it's getting close to my bedtime. So but Captain Matt, I really appreciate you jumping on here tonight. Guys, thank you so much. I'm going to give you the last word. So wherever you want to go, you've got the last word.
Yeah, I first of all, thanks, man, for having me on. I love to talk fishing. I love to try to help people catch more fish. I think that's what your podcast is about, and that's certainly what mine is about. And I think that the number one piece of advice that I can give any angler is to go out there and don't be so focused on catching fish that you don't stop and take time to look around and really understand what is happening around you. Understand why the fish are doing what they're doing and what is drawing them to the area. And if you watch and pay attention, you'll start putting these pieces together. It's just going to make you such a better angler, and the more fish we catch, the more fun we have. And I hope that you guys will do that responsibly and not, use it to fill your cooler all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, go check out his Instagram. Everything is down there. His Instagram is at empty_stringers, and go and listen to his podcast over on Spotify. Are you only on Spotify?
No, I'm on all the platforms. I use Spotify as my host, so they host the podcast, but I'm on all the platforms.
Okay, yeah, and that's the Empty Stringers podcast. So, and it is absolutely fantastic, guys. Go over there, follow him, and listen to all of his episodes. It's just a wealth of knowledge. And again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing that. And guys, just to kind of let you know, next week there will not be a DCO live. I will actually be in Jamaica. It is my wife and I's 30th wedding anniversary, and we're going down there with a couple of friends. We actually booked this out like a year and a half ago. We got crazy one night. It was like, hey, let's go to Jamaica. It's like, okay, So, guys, next week there will not be a DCO live, but I will probably put something up on Spotify. Maybe just do just a quick, little 30-minute recording on something. So, guys, again, thank you so much for joining us. And remember, I always close out this: conservation starts with you. Release a fish for someone else to enjoy. Guys, thanks so much. We will see you in 2 weeks on DCO Live. Thanks again, Captain Matt. Hang around. I want to talk to you for a minute.
All right, cool. Thanks, Chris.